It was just another busy Monday morning at NextGen Technologies when everything changed. The company's CEO, Mr. Zhang, walked into the glass-walled conference room for their weekly board meeting. The sunlight streamed through the windows as he adjusted his navy blue tie, greeting everyone with his usual warm smile. Nobody could have predicted what was about to unfold. Mr. Zhang had been running the company for the past decade, turning it from a small startup into a technology powerhouse. He was known for his sharp mind and ability to remember even the smallest details about his employees' lives. As the meeting progressed, Mr. Zhang was listening to the quarterly reports. The room was filled with the familiar faces of people he'd worked with for years. His vice president was presenting the latest sales figures when something felt off. Mr. Zhang's vision began to blur, and the voices around him started to sound distant, as if coming through a long tunnel. He tried to focus, but the PowerPoint presentation before him became a swirling mess of colors. The last thing he remembered was trying to stand up, his hand reaching for the glass of water in front of him. Then everything went black as he collapsed, his body crumpling to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. The room erupted into chaos. Someone screamed. Papers flew everywhere as people rushed to his side. His vice president immediately called for an ambulance while the HR director, who had basic medical training, checked his vital signs. Within minutes, paramedics rushed into the building. The entire office watched in shock as their beloved boss was carried out on a stretcher. Whispers and worried glances filled the corridors. Many employees had tears in their eyes. Mr. Zhang wasn't just their boss, he was a mentor and friend to many. At the hospital, doctors ran test after test. His wife arrived, her face pale with worry, clutching their family photo in her trembling hands. The medical team couldn't find anything obviously wrong. His vitals were stable, but he remained unresponsive. They called it a coma of unknown origin. What nobody knew was that Mr. Zhang could hear everything. He had regained consciousness but was trapped in his own body, unable to move or open his eyes. It was like being buried alive, except he could hear every word, every whisper, every conversation happening around him. The first day was filled with genuine concern. Nurses came and went, checking his vitals. His wife sat by his bedside, holding his hand and telling him about their children's day at school. The company's board members visited, their voices heavy with what seemed like sincere worry. But as the sun set and visitors thought he couldn't hear them, things began to change. 2 board members stayed behind after others left. Their hushed conversation made Mr. Zhang's blood run cold. "This might be our chance," one whispered. "The shares will drop when news gets out." "We need to act fast," the other replied. "Make sure our contacts are ready." Mr. Zhang wanted to jump up, to confront them, to demand an explanation, but his body remained still, betraying none of the rage and shock he felt inside. He was about to learn much more about the people he had trusted with his life's work. As night fell in the hospital room, machines beeping steadily around him, Mr. Zhang made a decision. He would keep listening. He would learn everything. And when the time was right, he would reveal that he had heard it all. The next morning brought a stream of visitors from the office. His assistant came first, genuinely sobbing as she arranged fresh flowers by his bedside. She spoke softly about keeping things running smoothly until his return, assuring him that she would protect his interests. But it was the conversation between his vice president and chief financial officer that made him realize the depth of the deception around him. As they stood near his hospital bed, thinking he was lost in unconsciousness, they discussed their plans in detail. "The board meeting is set for Friday," the VP said quietly. "Once we announce the restructuring plan, the smaller shareholders won't have a choice." "What about his family?" the CFO asked. "His wife trusts me completely. I've convinced her it's in everyone's best interest to let us handle things while he's indisposed." The betrayal cut deep. These were people who had celebrated holidays at his house, who had watched his children grow up. Now they were plotting to take everything he had built while he lay helpless. But Mr. Zhang had an advantage they didn't know about. Every word, every scheme, every betrayal was being carefully stored in his mind. He might be unable to move, but his mind was sharp as ever, cataloging every detail, every voice, every plan they revealed in his presence. The doctors remained puzzled. All his tests came back normal. They couldn't explain why he wouldn't wake up, leading to more whispered conversations about possible psychosomatic causes or hidden stress. By the end of that first fateful day, Mr. Zhang had learned more about his company and the people running it than he had in 10 years of active leadership. The mask of loyalty had slipped, revealing faces he never knew existed beneath the polite smiles and respectful nods. But not everyone was part of the conspiracy. He also heard the genuine grief in some voices, the loyal employees who spoke to him with real concern when they visited. These were the people he would remember when this was all over. As night settled over the hospital and the last visitor left, Mr. Zhang lay in his bed, his mind racing with everything he had learned. The machines continued their steady beeping, matching the rhythm of his thoughts as he began to form a plan. This wasn't just about saving his company anymore. It was about exposing the truth, about showing everyone the difference between genuine loyalty and opportunistic betrayal. But for now, he would wait, listen, and learn. His time would come. The night shift nurse came in to check his vitals one last time, humming softly as she worked. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled, unaware of the drama unfolding in this quiet hospital room. For now, Mr. Zhang remained still, gathering intelligence that would soon turn his company upside down. This was just the beginning. Over the next few days, he would learn much more about the plot against him, about the true nature of those he had trusted, and about the strength of his own will to survive and fight back. As the first day of his coma came to an end, Mr. Zhang knew one thing for certain. When he finally opened his eyes, nothing would ever be the same again. But first, he had more listening to do, more secrets to uncover, and more betrayals to document in his ever-alert mind. The second day of Mr. Zhang's coma brought even more shocking revelations. As morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, he lay still, listening to the steady beep of monitors and the squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor. His mind was clear and alert, though his body remained unresponsive. The first visitor of the day was his vice president, Mr. Li. Unlike yesterday's show of concern, today he came alone and his true colors began to show. Thinking Mr. Zhang was completely unconscious, he pulled out his phone and made a call right there in the hospital room. "Listen, I've got the documents from his office," Mr. Li whispered into his phone. "The new software designs, everything. Our competitors will pay a fortune for this." He paused, listening to the other end. No one suspects anything. They'd all think I'm being the loyal second-in-command, holding down the fort. Mr. Zhang's heart raced, though the monitors showed no change. The software designs were the company's future, a revolutionary AI system they'd spent 3 years developing. He listened as his VP detailed plans to sell their technology to the highest bidder. Throughout the day, a parade of employees came to visit. Some brought flowers, others just sat and talked. Each visitor revealed something about themselves, not knowing their boss was recording every word in his memory. His chief marketing officer spent 30 minutes complaining about how Mr. Zhang had never appreciated her ideas. "Maybe now they'll listen to my rebranding proposal," she muttered to another executive. "He was always too traditional, too careful. We need someone more dynamic." But not everyone showed their darker side. His elderly secretary, who had been with the company since day one, came during her lunch break. She sat quietly by his bed, patting his hand and telling him about how she was keeping his office plants alive. "Don't worry, sir," she said softly. "I'm watching everything just like you taught me. Something doesn't feel right about these emergency board meetings they're having." The most disturbing conversation came in the afternoon. His vice president returned, this time with the chief financial officer. They thought they were alone with an unconscious man, and their words made Mr. Zhang's blood run cold. "The transition has to happen now," the CFO said, "while he's out of commission. We've got investors lined up who want to take the company in a new direction." "What about his family's shares?" "His wife is worried sick about medical bills. I've convinced her that selling some shares would be wise. She trusts me to handle the paperwork." Mr. Zhang wanted to scream. His wife was being manipulated, their friendship of 15 years being used against her. He had always seen the CFO as a brother, had even made him his children's godfather. But there were moments of hope too. A junior programmer stopped by after his shift. The young man sat down and started talking about how Mr. Zhang had given him a chance when no other company would. "You saw something in me when everyone else just saw a kid without a degree," he said quietly. "I've been monitoring the network like you asked. If anyone tries to access the secure servers, I'll know." As evening approached, Mr. Zhang had learned more than he ever wanted to know about his company. He had discovered who was loyal and who was waiting for their chance to grab power. The betrayal hurt, but it also made him more determined. His wife came for her evening visit, and he could hear the worry in her voice as she talked about their children. The CFO had accompanied her, playing the role of the supported friend perfectly. Mr. Zhang listened as he subtly planted seeds of doubt about the company's future. "Maybe we should discuss those financial options I mentioned," the CFO said gently to his wife, "just to be prepared for any outcome." After they left, a night nurse came in to check his vitals. She was humming softly, adjusting his pillows and making sure he was comfortable. In the quiet of the hospital room, Mr. Zhang began to formulate his plan. He knew he needed to time his recovery perfectly. Too soon, and he wouldn't have all the evidence he needed. Too late, and there might not be a company left to save. The next revelation came from an unexpected source. The cleaning staff member who came to tidy his room was talking on her phone about a conversation she'd overheard in the executive bathroom. "They're planning something big for Friday's board meeting," she said to someone. "I heard them talking about changing all the security protocols and computer passwords, something about cleaning house once they take control." Mr. Zhang had always made a point of knowing every employee, from executives to cleaning staff. Now that policy was paying off in unexpected ways. Everyone felt comfortable talking in his room, not realizing they were adding pieces to his puzzle. Late that night, when the hospital was quiet except for the soft footsteps of night staff, Mr. Zhang reflected on everything he had learned. The betrayal of people he had trusted cut deep, but he also felt a strange sense of gratitude. This coma, as frightening as it was, had shown him the truth about his company and the people in it. He thought about the loyal employees he had discovered, the elderly secretary watching out for suspicious activities, the young programmer monitoring the networks, even the cleaning staff unknowingly providing valuable intelligence. They would be essential to his plans when he finally woke up. The day had revealed more than just corporate betrayal. It had shown him the complex web of human nature, greed and loyalty, deception and honesty, all playing out around his hospital bed. As he lay there, planning his next moves, Mr. Zhang realized that his company would never be the same after this. But maybe, just maybe, it would be stronger for having exposed the rot at its core. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new revelations, and new pieces of the puzzle. But for now, in the quiet of the night, Mr. Zhang continued his silent vigil, gathering information that would soon turn the tables on those who thought they had him beaten. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time as another day of his secret listening came to an end. Outside his window, the city slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in this quiet hospital room, where a man who appeared to be in a coma was actually orchestrating the biggest counterattack of his life. The third day in the hospital revealed the deepest layer of conspiracy yet. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Mr. Zhang lay motionless, his mind racing with all he had learned so far. But nothing had prepared him for what he would discover today. The morning began with an unexpected visit from 3 board members who thought they were alone in the room with an unconscious man. They spoke in hushed tones, but their words were clear enough. "The paperwork is ready," the first board member whispered. "Once we have control, we'll split the company into smaller units and sell them off piece by piece." "What about the employees?" another asked. "Necessary casualties," the third replied coldly. "The real money is in the patents and client list." Mr. Zhang felt his heart breaking. These board members had been with the company for over 8 years. He had attended their children's weddings, celebrated their successes, supported them through hard times. Now they were planning to dismantle everything he had built, not caring about the thousands of employees whose lives would be affected. Mid-morning brought a different kind of revelation. The IT director came in, supposedly to pay his respects, but actually to make a private phone call. "Yes, I've started deleting the backup files," he muttered into his phone. "By the time anyone realizes what's happening, all traces of the original project will be gone. They'll have to use our new version." Mr. Zhang realized with growing alarm that the conspiracy went deeper than just a corporate takeover. They were trying to erase years of research and development, replacing it with their own modified versions. The implications were staggering. Around lunchtime, his CFO returned, this time with two people Mr. Zhang had never heard before. Their footsteps were confident as they entered his room. "This is the man who built it all," the CFO said, his voice dripping with false respect. "And soon it will be ours to rebuild. Our competitors are offering triple what we initially discussed." "What about his wife?" one of the strangers asked. "She trusts me completely. I've been like a brother to him for years." The CFO's laugh was cold. "She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." The betrayal felt like a physical pain. This man had been his children's godfather, had spent holidays at their home, had been trusted with every aspect of the business. Now he was orchestrating the complete destruction of everything Mr. Zhang had worked for. But the day wasn't finished with its revelations. A group of middle managers came in during the afternoon, thinking they were having a private meeting in the quietest place they could find. "They're planning to shut down the research division," one whispered. "All those scientists, all that work, just gone." "What about the community programs?" another asked. "The scholarship fund, the employee assistance program, all being dismantled. They say it's too expensive to maintain." Mr. Zhang had always believed that a company was more than just its bottom line. The programs they were planning to cut had helped hundreds of families, put dozens of kids through college, supported employees through medical crisis. The thought of all that being destroyed for quick profit made his blood boil. Late afternoon brought the most shocking discovery yet. His vice president returned with the CFO and what sounded like a lawyer. They were discussing the final details of their plan. "Once the transfer is complete, we'll announce his condition has worsened," the VP said. "The shareholders will panic, stock will plummet, and we'll buy everything at rock-bottom prices." "And if he wakes up?" the lawyer asked. "The doctors say there's no sign of consciousness," the CFO replied. "But if he does, well, we've documented several instances of erratic behavior and poor decision-making over the past year. All properly backdated, of course. They had been planning this for months, maybe even years. Every decision, every friendly gesture, every show of loyalty had been part of their long game. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that just because his eyes were closed, his mind wasn't working. They didn't know that every word, every plan, every betrayal was being carefully memorized." Evening brought a ray of hope. The elderly secretary returned, this time with the young programmer they had hired last year. They spoke quietly, but their words carried determination. "Something's not right with these server changes," the programmer said. "I've been keeping logs of everything. The timestamps don't match up." "Keep recording everything," the secretary replied. "When he wakes up, and he will wake up, he'll need to know what they've done." As night fell, Mr. Zhang lay in his hospital bed, processing everything he had learned. The betrayal was complete, from the board level down to middle management, from financial records to technical infrastructure. They had planned for everything except him being able to hear it all. The night shift began, and the hospital quieted down. In the darkness, Mr. Zhang began to organize all the information he had gathered. He knew who was involved, what they were planning, and when they intended to strike. Now he just needed to time his awakening perfectly. He thought about his wife, worried and vulnerable, being manipulated by people she trusted. He thought about his employees, their jobs and futures hanging in the balance. He thought about the community programs that had helped so many people. The monitors beat steadily in the quiet room, matching the rhythm of his thoughts. Outside, the city lights twinkled, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the hospital's walls. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more pieces to the puzzle. But for now, Mr. Zhang had what he needed, a complete picture of the conspiracy, the players involved, and their ultimate plans. When he finally opened his eyes, they wouldn't know what hit them. Every conversation, every whispered plan, every betrayal would come back to haunt them. The question wasn't if he would stop them, but when. Timing would be everything. He needed to gather just a bit more evidence, wait for them to incriminate themselves just a little more thoroughly. Then he would show them that sometimes the person you think isn't listening hears everything. And in this case, he had heard more than enough to bring their entire scheme crashing down around them. The fourth day brought unexpected allies and hope to Mr. Zhang's silent vigil. As morning light crept into his hospital room, A small group of loyal employees gathered, thinking their unconscious boss couldn't hear their determined planning. The elderly secretary arrived first, quietly closing the door behind her. She was soon joined by the young programmer and one of the senior accountants. Their hushed conversation revealed they had been quietly investigating the strange happenings at the company. "I've been tracking all the unusual financial transfers," the accountant whispered. "They're trying to hide it in the international accounts, but I found a pattern." The young programmer nodded. "And I've documented every unauthorized access to the secure servers." They thought they were being clever, but they left digital fingerprints everywhere. Mr. Zhang felt a surge of pride. These were the people he had personally hired, trusting his instincts about their character. Now they were proving that trust wasn't misplaced. His secretary spoke next, her voice firm despite her age. "I've kept copies of every suspicious document they've tried to push through. 30 years as a secretary teaches you to keep receipts of everything." Throughout the morning, more loyal employees trickled in. Each brought pieces of evidence, sharing their findings with the growing group of resistance. They were careful to time their visits between the conspirators' appearances, having mapped out the pattern of who came when. The head of research and development stopped by around noon. "They're trying to sabotage our latest project," she reported to the others. "But my team has been keeping backup copies of everything. We've hidden them where they'll never think to look." Mr. Zhang listened intently as they coordinated their efforts. These were the people who understood that a company was more than just profit margins and stock prices. They were fighting to protect not just their jobs, but the vision of what the company stood for. The afternoon brought a visit from the company's longest-serving janitor. His contribution proved invaluable. "I'm invisible to them," he said quietly. "They don't stop talking when I'm around. You wouldn't believe the things I've overheard in the executive washroom." Each visitor added another piece to the puzzle, another layer of protection against the conspiracy. They were building a case, document by document, recording by recording, witness by witness. They weren't the only ones visiting. The conspirators continued their own parade of appearances, each visit revealing more of their plans to Mr. Zhang and his hidden allies. The vice president came in mid-afternoon, having what he thought was a private phone conversation. "Everything's ready for Friday," he said to someone. "Once we announce the restructuring, it'll be too late for anyone to stop us." What he didn't know was that the young programmer had already found a way to access his email history. The secretary had copies of every document he thought he had secretly pushed through. The accountant had traced every suspicious transaction. As evening approached, the loyal group gathered one final time. They had coordinated their efforts, gathered their evidence, and prepared for whatever might come next. All they needed now was for their boss to wake up. "We'll keep watching," the secretary promised, patting Mr. Zhang's hand. "Everything is documented. When you wake up, we'll be ready." After they left, Mr. Zhang's wife came for her evening visit. Today, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by their teenage daughter. Neither spoke much, but their presence filled the room with love and concern. "Dad," his daughter said softly, "I know you can hear us. The CFO keeps telling Mom to sign some papers, but something feels wrong." "I told her to wait." Mr. Zhang wanted to jump up and hug her. His daughter had inherited his instinct for spotting trouble. Her suspicion might have just saved their family's financial future. As night settled in, Mr. Zhang reflected on the day's revelations. While the conspiracy ran deep, the loyalty of his true employees ran deeper. They had organized themselves, working in secret to protect what he had built. The night nurse came in for her regular checks, humming softly as she worked. Outside, the city was winding down, but inside this hospital room, plans were taking shape. Mr. Zhang now had a network of allies, each playing their part. The secretary keeping records, the programmer tracking digital trails, the accountant following money flows, even the janitor gathering intelligence. They were his eyes and ears while he lay seemingly unconscious. He thought about each of them, these quiet heroes who were risking their jobs to do what was right. They weren't the highest-paid employees, weren't the ones with corner offices. But they were the ones who understood what integrity meant. The monitors continued their steady beeping in the darkness. Mr. Zhang knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more revelations, more pieces of the puzzle. But now he had help. Now he wasn't fighting this battle alone. His loyal employees had shown him something valuable. that while power and money could buy temporary allies, true loyalty came from treating people with respect and dignity. The conspirators had money and position on their side, but his allies had something stronger: principles. As the fourth day of his coma drew to a close, Mr. Jean felt more confident than ever. When the time came to open his eyes, he wouldn't just have his own testimony about what he had heard. He would have documented evidence, witnessed accounts, and a team of dedicated employees ready to back him up. The city lights twinkled outside his window, and somewhere out there, his loyal employees were continuing their quiet resistance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Mr. Jean could rest easier knowing he wasn't alone in this fight. The truth would come out, and when it did, it would be backed by more than just his word. It would be supported by the careful work of people who believed in something bigger than themselves. People who proved that sometimes the strongest weapons against corruption are integrity, dedication, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The fifth day in the hospital brought the conspiracy to its breaking point. The morning started with urgent whispers between the vice president and CFO right next to Mr. Zhang's bed. Their voices carried an edge of panic that hadn't been there before. "The shareholders' meeting is scheduled for tomorrow," the VP hissed. "Someone's been asking questions about the new contracts. We need to move faster." "What about his wife?" the CFO replied. "She still hasn't signed the transfer documents." "Then make her sign them today. Use whatever pressure you need to." Their footsteps hurried out of the room, leaving Mr. Zhang seething inside his motionless body. The thought of them pressuring his wife made him want to leap up right then, but he forced himself to remain still. The timing had to be perfect. Mid-morning brought another disturbing development. The company's head of legal affairs visited, speaking quietly into his phone by the window. "Yes, I've prepared the documents showing his mental decline over the past year. Once these are filed, even if he wakes up, his decisions won't have any legal weight." The betrayal cut deep. This was the same lawyer who had helped Mr. Zhang set up the company's employee assistance program years ago. Now he was fabricating documents to declare him mentally unfit. Around lunchtime, Mr. Zhang's wife arrived, her voice shaking as she spoke to him. "Dear, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm scared. The CFO keeps insisting I need to sign these papers today. He says if I don't, we might lose everything." Mr. Zhang wanted desperately to reach out, to tell her not to sign anything. His heart raced, though the monitors showed no change. Then his daughter's voice cut in. "Mom, remember what Dad always says, never sign anything under pressure. Let's wait." A surge of pride mixed with his worry. His daughter's strong instincts might save them all. The afternoon brought a flurry of activity. The conspirators had taken over the hospital room, treating it like their private meeting space. They didn't realize they were giving Mr. Zhang front row seats to their own downfall. "The board meeting is set for tomorrow at 3 p.m., the VP announced to his allies. "Once we announce the restructuring plan, the stock will plummet. Our partners are ready to buy everything at rock-bottom prices." "What about the loyal employees?" someone asked. "The ones who've been snooping around." "They'll be the first to go in the restructuring. We've already prepared their termination letters." Mr. Zhang listened as they listed the names of everyone who would be fired, the same loyal employees who had been gathering evidence against them all week. The irony would have made him smile if he could. Late afternoon brought the CFO back, this time with unexpected company, Mr. Zhang's brother. The conversation that followed made his blood run cold. "Your sister-in-law needs to sign these papers," the CFO insisted. "As his brother, you need to convince her it's for the best." There was a long pause before his brother spoke. "No, something about this doesn't feel right. My brother built this company from nothing. He wouldn't want us making these decisions while he's lying here." The CFO's voice turned cold. "Then you'll all lose everything. Is that what you want?" "What I want," his brother replied firmly, "is for you to leave this room. Now." The sound of angry footsteps stomped out of the room. Mr. Zhang felt a wave of gratitude for his brother's loyalty. As evening approached, the tension in the hospital room grew thicker. The conspirators were getting desperate. Their carefully laid plans were starting to unravel, and they knew it. The VP returned one last time, speaking urgently into his phone. "We have to close this deal tomorrow. Something's not right. People are asking too many questions. If we don't do it now, we might not get another chance." Mr. Zhang could hear the stress in his voice. The man who had seemed so confident days ago was starting to crack under pressure. Night brought an unexpected visitor, the young security guard who worked the late shift. He spoke quietly to Mr. Zhang while checking the room. "Sir, I've been keeping track of everyone who comes and goes, just like you taught me. Your secretary has all the logs. They think nobody notices them meeting here late at night, but we see everything." The day's revelations had made one thing clear: tomorrow's board meeting would be the moment of truth. The conspirators were planning to make their final move, not knowing that their every word and action had been documented. Mr. Zhang lay in his hospital bed, mentally preparing for what was to come. His wife hadn't signed the papers. His loyal employees had gathered evidence. His brother had stood firm. Now all that remained was the timing of his recovery. The night nurse came in for her final rounds, adjusting his pillows and checking his vitals. Outside, the city was quieting down, but Mr. Zhang's mind was racing with plans. Tomorrow would be the day. He would finally open his eyes, but not until the perfect moment, when the conspirators had incriminated themselves beyond any doubt, when their plans were laid bare for everyone to see. The steady beep of monitors filled the dark room. Mr. Zhang thought about his company, his employees, his family. Everything he had built was at stake, but he wasn't alone in this fight anymore. His last thought before drifting into a light sleep was of tomorrow's board meeting. The conspirators thought they had orchestrated the perfect takeover. They didn't realize they had actually orchestrated their own exposure. The time for listening was almost over. Soon, it would be time for action. And when Mr. Zhang finally opened his eyes, he would have more than enough evidence to bring down everyone who had plotted against him and his company. As the fifth day ended, the hospital fell quiet except for the soft footsteps of night staff. Tomorrow would change everything. The only question was, who would be left standing when the dust settled? The sixth day dawned with an electric tension in the air. Mr. Zhang knew this would be his last full day of pretending to be in a coma. The board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, and he needed to make these final hours count. The morning began with a flurry of activity. His loyal secretary arrived early, speaking softly near his bed while arranging fresh flowers. "Sir, everything is ready. We've backed up all the evidence on 3 separate secure servers." The young programmer even set up a live stream system for tomorrow's board meeting, just in case. She was interrupted by the arrival of the VP and CFO, who burst into the room thinking they were alone. The secretary quietly pretended to busy herself with the flowers while they talked. "The documents are all prepared," the CFO said, his voice tense. "Once his wife signs them today, there's no going back. The company will be ours before he even opens his eyes." The VP laughed nervously. "If he opens his eyes, the doctors still can't explain his condition. Maybe we got lucky and he'll stay this way." Mr. Zhang felt his pulse quicken at their callousness, but the monitors remained steady. Years of meditation practice were finally paying off. He had perfect control over his physical reactions. Throughout the morning, his loyal employees continued their careful surveillance. The young programmer stopped by, pretending to check his phone while actually testing the recording equipment they'd hidden in the room. "The system's working perfectly," he whispered to the secretary. "Every word they say in here is being recorded and transcribed in real time." Around noon, the conspirators gathered for what they thought was a final planning session. They spoke freely, believing their unconscious boss couldn't hear them. "Tomorrow's schedule is set," the VP announced. "The board meets at 3 p.m. We present the restructuring plan, push through the ownership changes, and announce the company's new direction." "What about the employees who've been asking questions?" someone asked. "Security will escort them out before the meeting even starts. We can't risk any interruptions." They didn't realize that their entire conversation was being transmitted to a secure server, adding to the mountain of evidence against them. The afternoon brought the most difficult moment yet. Mr. Zhang's wife arrived with their children, and the CFO was waiting. He could hear the manipulation in the man's voice as he pressed her to sign the documents. "Mrs. Zhang, please understand. These papers protect your family's interests. If you don't sign today, the company could be at risk." His wife's voice trembled. "But why today? Why can't it wait until he wakes up?" "The market won't wait. Please trust me. I'm doing this for your family." Just when Mr. Zhang thought he might have to break his cover, his teenage daughter spoke up again. "Mom, remember what we discussed? Dad's brother is bringing his lawyer tomorrow morning. We should wait." The CFO's voice turned cold. That would be a serious mistake. The only mistake, his daughter replied firmly, would be signing anything without proper legal review. Mr. Zhang heard the CFO's frustrated footsteps leave the room. His family stayed a while longer, his wife holding his hand while their children talked about their day. He wished he could squeeze her hand back, let her know she'd made the right choice. As evening approached, the loyal employees made their final preparations. The secretary coordinated with the programmer, the accountant double-checked their evidence, and even the cleaning staff helped by keeping watch for suspicious activity. "Everything's in place," the secretary whispered during her last visit. "Tomorrow, when you're ready, just open your eyes. We'll handle the rest." Night brought an unexpected visit from the VP, who paced the room while making phone calls. His voice carried an edge of desperation. The signatures didn't come through. "No, his wife refuses to sign. Yes, I know what's at stake. We'll have to move forward without them. Once we announce the changes tomorrow, it'll be too late for anyone to stop us." Mr. Zhang listened carefully to every word, every detail of their plans. Each conversation was another nail in their coffin. The night shift began, and the hospital quieted down. Mr. Zhang mentally rehearsed his timing for tomorrow. He would wait until the perfect moment when the conspirators had revealed their plans to the entire board. His loyal employees had done their part, gathering evidence and protecting the company's interests. His family had stood strong against the pressure. Now it was his turn to act. The monitors beat steadily in the darkness. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled, unaware of the drama that would unfold tomorrow in a corporate boardroom. Mr. Zhang thought about everything he had learned during his silence. The betrayal still hurt, but it had also shown him something valuable, the true character of the people around him. Some had revealed their greed and dishonesty, while others had demonstrated remarkable loyalty and courage. Tomorrow would change everything. The conspirators thought they had planned for every possibility, but they hadn't planned for this, their unconscious boss hearing every word, recording every scheme, gathering evidence even while appearing helpless. As the 6th day drew to a close, Mr. Zhang felt ready. His mind was clear, his plan was set, and his timing would be perfect. When he finally opened his eyes tomorrow, the look on their faces would be worth every minute of his silent vigil. The night nurse made her final rounds, checking his vitals one last time. Everything appeared normal, just as it had for the past 6 days. But tomorrow, nothing would be normal. Tomorrow, justice would finally be served. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the final act was about to begin. Mr. Zhang drifted into a light sleep, knowing that when he next opened his eyes, it would be to expose the truth and reclaim what was rightfully his. The day of reckoning arrived with the first rays of sunlight streaming through the hospital window. Mr. Zhang lay motionless, knowing this would be the last time he had to maintain his facade. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m., and every minute until then felt like an hour. The morning brought a parade of final preparations. His loyal secretary arrived early, her footsteps familiar after all these days. "Sir," she whispered, adjusting his pillows, "everything is ready. The evidence is secured, the cameras are in place, and your brother's lawyer has reviewed everything." The VP and CFO burst in shortly after, their voices carrying an edge of triumph mixed with nervous energy. "The boardroom is set up," the VP said. "Security has their instructions. None of the troublemakers will get anywhere near the meeting." "And his family?" the CFO asked. "They refused to sign, but it doesn't matter now. Once we announce the restructuring, they won't have a choice." Throughout the morning, Mr. Zhang listened as the conspirators made their final moves. They had no idea that their every word was being recorded, every plan documented by the hidden systems his loyal employees had installed. At noon, his wife and children came to visit. Their presence gave him strength for what was to come. "Dad," his daughter said softly, "whatever happens in that meeting today, we know you'll find a way to make it right." The afternoon arrived, and the hospital room became eerily quiet. Most of the conspirators had left for the office, preparing for their moment of triumph. What they didn't know was that Mr. Zhang's room had been connected to the boardroom's audio system by his tech-savvy employees. At 2:45 p.m., he could hear the boardroom filling up. The murmur of voices, the shuffling of papers, the nervous energy of people who thought they were about to witness a corporate takeover. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," the VP's voice came through clearly at 3 p.m. sharp. "We're here today to discuss the future of our company. As you know, our CEO has been incapacitated for the past week." Mr. Zhang listened as they began laying out their plans. The VP described the restructuring, the CFO presented manipulated financial figures, and the head of legal affairs explained the transfer of power. And now, the VP announced, "We'll vote on the new leadership structure." That was the moment Mr. Zhang had been waiting for. With perfect timing, he opened his eyes and pressed the call button his secretary had positioned near his hand days ago. The boardroom speakers crackled to life with the nurse's voice. "Yes, Mr. Zhang." "Oh, doctor, come quickly, he's awake." The chaos in the boardroom was immediate. Through the audio feed, he could hear gasps, exclamations, and the sound of papers being shuffled frantically. "We need to call a recess," the VP stammered. "I don't think that will be necessary," a new voice cut in, his brother's lawyer. "In fact, I believe Mr. Zhang would like to address the board right now." Within 15 minutes, Mr. Zhang was sitting up in his hospital bed, facing a laptop that showed the stunned faces of his board members via video conference. His loyal secretary stood beside him, holding folders of evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Zhang said, his voice strong despite its days of disuse, "I believe we need to revise today's agenda." The next hour was a masterclass in corporate justice. One by one, Mr. Zhang played back recordings of the conspirators' conversations. His secretary distributed documents showing the trail of their deception. The young programmer demonstrated how they had attempted to delete crucial project files. The conspirators' faces grew paler with each revelation. The VP tried to protest, but his own voice on the recording silenced him. The CFO attempted to leave the room but found security, the real security team, loyal to Mr. Zhang, waiting at the doors. For the past week, Mr. Zhang continued, "I have heard every word, every plan, every betrayal. But I also heard something else, the loyalty of employees who refused to let this company be destroyed by greed." The board members who weren't part of the conspiracy listened in shocked silence as the full scope of the plot was revealed. When Mr. Zhang finished presenting the evidence, the vote was unanimous. The conspirators were removed from their positions immediately. By evening, the company's legitimate security team had escorted the former VP, CFO, and their conspirators from the building. Their computers were seized, their access revoked, and their careers in the industry effectively over. Mr. Zhang's loyal employees were celebrated as heroes. The secretary who had coordinated their efforts was promoted to chief of staff. The young programmer became the new head of each security. Every employee who had helped protect the company was recognized and rewarded. As night fell, Mr. Zhang sat in his hospital room with his family, finally able to hold his wife's hand and hug his children properly. "How did you know not to sign those papers?" he asked his wife. She smiled. "Because I know you. Even in a coma, I knew you'd find a way to protect us all." The final piece of justice came the next morning. The stock market responded positively to the news of Mr. Zhang's recovery and the exposure of the attempted takeover. The company's value actually increased as investors appreciated the strong corporate governance and employee loyalty that had been demonstrated. The story became a legend in the business world, the CEO who turned a coma into a corporate counterstrike. But for Mr. Zhang, the real lesson wasn't about corporate tactics or clever strategies. It was about the power of trust, loyalty, and doing what's right even when no one seems to be watching. As he finally left the hospital, Mr. Zhang looked at his company's building gleaming in the morning sun. The experience had changed him and the company for the better. They had all learned that true strength lies not in schemes and deceptions, but in the bonds of trust between people who believe in doing what's right. The conspiracy was over, justice had been served, and the company was now stronger than ever. But most importantly, the truth had prevailed, proving that sometimes the best weapon against deception is simply being patient enough to let people reveal their true nature.